Welcome to the Radicards podcast on radicards.com. I'm your host, Patrick Greeno, and today I've got Brian Hayes joining me of Linguist Sports Cards. And now today we're going to be talking about something that we're all dealing with, social distancing, right? Sort of how it's impacted the hobby. Now, Brian, you and I have been collecting a long time, and this is kind of a very unique situation that we've encountered that's relevant to all of us. I'd like us to just talk about how what we've experienced, what we've observed, and sort of our theories. And some of these things, obviously, we can't back any of this up with any degree of certainty or causation, but there may be a correlation at least. At least there's something. I mean, correlations are meaningless without causation, right? It's just like, yes, if it's sunny outside and one of your favorite TV shows is on, that doesn't mean that it's sunny outside because of one of your favorite TV shows is on. It's just there happens to be a correlation there. So with the social distancing and the hobby, the impact on the hobby, I'm going to talk about some of the things that I've observed over the last couple of months since like March, early Marchish. And, Brian, just feel free to jump in and we're kind of banter on this for a while because I think it's relevant right now since we're all kind of stuck at home and, some of us have some liquid cash. Some of us are tight budgeted right now. Totally understandable. We're all hearing the same stuff, but we're just going to kind of talk about how we think social distancing has impacted the hobby. So I'm going to start. So since March, I've noticed some spikes in sales of certain classic cards. Okay. But let's talk about psychology for a minute before we jump into this. There's that old saying, idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? So when you have extra time on your hands, you're going to be thinking about, things to do that might not be desirable. We call this opportunity theory, where we have extra time, so we're going to go like rob a 7-Eleven, right? Like that's the thing. That when people are out of work, they go and get into skullduggerous activities. Whereas in the hobby, I'm going to turn this around to a positive. In the hobby, we have extra time. We can go think about cards that we'll have more time to ponder about the hobby, like what we used to collect, what we used to like when we were kids. The stuff that like classic cards, like, oh, I remember that card, whatever. We have more time to think about this stuff because we're not stuck at a 9-to-5 job. A lot of us are at home working from home now, or we're on unemployment or whatever the case is. We're isolated. So we have more time to ponder thoughts on things that we like, that make us happy during this really weird time. And so because of that, we have time to think about some of the stuff that we might have not thought about, at least for a while. And so we're going to go and research those things on eBay and, oh my gosh, they're cheap. I'm going to buy those things now because I hadn't thought about them for a while. So now what I'm seeing now is a spike in sales of certain cards that just a couple of months ago you could have gotten for like, say, $30, $30, $60, $80. Now they're like $120 to $400 cards. And I don't know if there's a causation or if it's just, we have more time to think. So now we're seeing this. Or more people are like, oh my gosh, I forgot about that card. That's awesome. I'm totally going to go and get that card. But I don't know what the catalyst is for those changes. The only thing I can think of is just people have more time on their hands. Perfect example. I'm going to give you two examples right now, just off the cuff. 91 Upper Deck SP Baseball Jordan, the Michael Jordan card. That card just a couple months ago could be had for just a few bucks raw. Now it's like a $12 to $15 card raw. And PSA 10s are fetching like $350. But that card was not $350 just a couple months ago. Okay, that's instance number one. And also, too, there's no shortage of that card. It's 91 Upper Deck. It is the absolute prime of the junk wax era. So there is no shortage. What is SP in 1991? The elites themselves had print runs of 10,000, right, from Don Russ. So the 91 Upper Deck SP Jordan, I'm thinking like well into the 5 figures, if not the 6 figures print run for that card. Like it's available all day long, every day, the week, 24/7, forever. You can always find a copy of that card online. So I don't expect this spike to last, but when it comes back down, it probably won't come back down to where it was. It'll just be a little higher. That's typically what I've seen with like the trends, is that when something spikes and it does the dust settles, the values are a little bit higher than where they initially were. Not crazy higher, but like, instead of $40, it might settle at $60. So for this card, if it was had for like $5, it might come back down to like $8. And so that's instance number one. Instance number two, as a Frank Thomas collector, I've I keep track of Frank Thomas cards at list pretty routinely, and I've noticed that pretty much everything of his from 1990 that's graded PSA 10. A couple months ago, predictable sales of like the Topps card was like $25. The Leaf anywhere between $60 and $80, like right in that $20 range there. Now that 90 Topps card is like a $120 card in a 10. The 90 Leaf, $350 to $400. And this is like insanity to me because there's no shortage of those cards in high grade. So I think that we're seeing a spike now, but once we get back to work, we're going to see the dust settle and things go kind of, normalize again. I don't expect the Leaf rookie to be had again and for 60 to 80, but it might come back down to like 120. I don't know what's going to happen, but I can't expect this 90 Leaf for $400 business to last forever. It's just I don't see it being sustainable. As far as the Jordan card, again, it's just too many copies out there. I don't see it being sustainable. If the card was super rare and it came from a highly short printed set, then we can talk about sustainability. But even if that were the case, we would have already seen values for that card. There wouldn't be a spike. It wouldn't exist. And if it were, it would be like a little hiccup because it would already be rare and already be hard to find in high grade. So these are the kinds of things I think about how social distancing has potentially impacted the hobby. It's given us a lot more time to think about cards. And in that sense, given us a lot more time to surf eBay around those thoughts. So Brian, your thoughts?
Sure. Well, first of all, for Michael Jordan in particular, I'm not sure if you're aware, Patrick, but ESPN right now has been running the Last Dance documentary, where they've been showcasing Jordan's final season with with the Bulls there in 97, 98. And I think not just Jordan, but a lot of those Bulls players, in addition to what you said, I think the documentary, especially I think from like the younger collectors who maybe didn't see Jordan when he was actually playing, are sort of being introduced or reintroduced to Michael Jordan. So that might be playing an additional factor. Like Jordan's always going to be hot. But yeah, like what we've seen, like with these increases, it's just there's probably multiple reasons for it, but definitely I thought should mention that documentary. I've watched the first 8 episodes. There's two left. They do a really good job of not just showcasing the 97-98 season, but really his entire career, starting back at his days at North Carolina. So that documentary, in conjunction with just people having maybe more time to peruse eBay, think about the cards that they used to collect, might be a reason for increases in Jordan. But like also as you mentioned, like the whole hobby seems to be on fire right now. So yeah, with Jordan and those Bulls players, this documentary is just a really excellent documentary that ESPN has been putting on. I think that might be contributing to the growth in his cards. But as far as the rest of the market, like definitely, like I've seen it, baseball, basketball, and football recently over the last 2 months, increases in prices in a lot of cards. And for me, I think maybe a couple reasons that, I think that might be able to explain or partially explain why we're seeing that. Because on the surface, it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, right? Like the economy has been obviously affected in many negative ways because of the COVID-19 situation. And, the natural thinking is there should be less disposable income around. And cards often for a lot of people, it is a hobby, and like that's where they're using disposable income. And so it doesn't on the surface make a whole lot of sense that we're seeing these increases in prices. But I do think that because the lack of actual sporting events, of actual games, people do have extra time as well, in addition to maybe just being home more often with chances to be on the internet and checking out eBay and other sites where you can pick up cards. Without games on like that, watching sports, actually, watching the games and athletes, that actually in and of itself takes a lot of time. And that also might be keeping, generally speaking, if you're not spending a couple hours a night watching sporting events, it gives you more time to be looking at eBay and sort of remembering, having that nostalgia for some of those cards that, for older collectors that they chased after as a kid. And that feeling of nostalgia can maybe be a partial explanation for why some of the interest and demand for some of these cards is going up. But also I think that if you think about why people enter the hobby of card collecting, I don't even know if hobby is the right word, because for a lot of people it is a hobby, and for other individuals it's not a hobby. Cards are a mechanism, a vehicle to for investing and for trying to earn some profit. And how do you do that in cards is you have to have knowledge of both cards and sports to do it, and it takes a lot of work, but it can be done if you're in the collecting game for investment purposes, and if you're looking to flip in the short run or maybe investing for the long run. It takes a lot of knowledge and hard work, but there's other ways. Other ways if you're interested in sports to other than sports cards, that it's possible to turn knowledge of sports into financial gain. And a couple of those, just off the top of my head, would be just direct gambling on the actual sporting events. You can, it's pretty easy to gamble these days. It's getting easier and easier. And a lot of people do that. Also, a lot of people like to play fantasy sports, and depending on which league you're in, there's potential in fantasy sports to also can get some pretty hefty paydays for that if you do it right and you're very serious about it. You have to have a lot of knowledge about sports to do it. The thing is, with the current situation, gambling on sports and fantasy sports, they're gone because there's no actual sporting events, and so you've got, at least it seems. It seems like this might be one explanation to me, at least, is that you might have certain individuals who have knowledge about sports, who like sports, but can't use that knowledge the way they normally would be, and that would be people interested in fantasy sports and gambling. Those mechanisms are shut off now without live sporting matches. But collecting cards is not turned off right now. We're obviously still collecting cards, and so you might have those individuals moving away from the arenas which they typically find themselves and moving into the industry of sports cards, wanting to use their knowledge for investment purposes. And you can still do that even without live sporting events. And so I think the population of individuals going after cards, or certain cards at least, could be attributed to just a newer population that has sort of joined the old population of collectors, and it's sort of expanded right now. And so I think that those individuals, for me, the question is going to be like the long run impact is, once we get the live sporting matches back, individuals like that, are they going to stay in the hobby, or are they going to go back to their traditional arenas of knowledge and just sort of leave card collecting? And so I think that remains to be seen. But for the time being, without the live sports, I think we can expect at least I don't know if these prices are going to keep going up. I mean, like it's crazy, some of the prices that we're seeing and the demand there, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, I think it's healthy that people are interested in sports cards, or at least thinking about sports cards, because obviously we've seen it go the other way in the past sometimes. But you can be, obviously we don't want the hobby to be so overheated with all these investors that, some so-called traditional collectors might, you're going to start to feel the impact of all these just increased prices across the board. So it's sort of a balance that we're all trying to understand at the moment.
Thank you, Brian. There's a lot to cover there. I took some notes as you were talking here. So the first thing going back to the Jordan stuff.
Yep.
So you mentioned something that I often have to remember with cards, is that whenever something is covered on TV, it drastically, for a temporary time until the TV coverage expires, if you will, that time frame impacts sale values of cards. People like, oh my gosh, the Jordan documentary, I should list a Jordan card because it's going to put more eyeballs on his stuff in the market. That's common. That's a common cause and effect of the hobby. Is that if ESPN's going to run something, it's going to keep thoughts of that something on the forefront, and then I'm going to go look for that on eBay because they're. It's funny, I was thinking about this the other day, is that when that happens, people want something to share with their friends to converse about over, buffalo wings at the bar, which is awesome. I always used to joke that, soccer is not an American sport, although we have soccer teams, because people don't go to the bars to talk about soccer plays. They go to the bars to talk about football plays, basketball plays, baseball plays.
Yeah.
We sometimes might talk about hockey plays, but it's probably extremely rare because hockey is more of a Canadian sport, right? And so we have these other things that when we want conversation pieces into our collection so that we can go and be excited about our stuff with somebody else, our friends, who might also collect the same stuff. And so the ESPN documentaries are 30 for 30s. Now they should call them like 1,000 for thousands because they're going to keep doing these. And they're well beyond 30 videos right now. Initially, it was like 30 videos by 30 directors, but now now it's just a name. It doesn't have the same meaning. But those documentaries are amazing. And like when they had the Jordan documentary when he was in the dude's 94-95 baseball with the farm team for the White Sox.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great documentary, and I'm sure that when it came out, we saw a spike for his baseball cards. And I collect his baseball cards. I have most of the ones that I want. There are a few others that are sort of high end that I just don't see that I'd like to have. And of course, it'd be nice to have some high grade examples, but they're all pretty affordable because they came out during a time when they weren't really rare, and they still kind of aren't that rare, and so it's really nice. But yeah, you brought up a good point that when something is covered on TV, it impacts average resale values of items for the associated player online, and so it from the investor would be considered a bad time to buy because of that. And so I typically will end up buying stuff of players that, people aren't buying. Like I bought my Kurt Schilling 89 Donruss PSA 10 many years ago, and it was like $10. Now that card is over $100 because he's expected to get in the Hall of Fame next year. And so like I bought my 1990 Leaf Larry Walker in a PSA 10. I was the only bidder at like $10 many years ago. Now that card's like $180. And so it's like, Harold Baines, PSA 9, 81 tops. I got mine for, I think, less than $15 back in 2010. Now that card in a 9 is, it's expensive. And so, like, I always look at it as what are people not buying? That's the stuff I should be buying right now. Like, I don't, but, I don't. I try to pay close attention to that. Like, I talk about this before. Is that there's a category of what I like to call bandwagon collectors. And these are the types who jump on whoever's the hot prospect right now. And whoever's selling is making, good decisions by moving that stuff right now. Whoever's selling like Tatis Jr. and, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and some of the hot players right now, they're cleaning up. They're cleaning up. Yeah. And it's because there are a lot of collectors who like to collect just the current prospects. And I've always been of the mindset, at least I've become this way now. When I was younger, I was totally buying, Travis Lee in 1997. But I'm of the mindset of like, wait until it cools off. I'm going to buy an Ohtani card like in some years down the line from now, and it'll probably be a nice one. But at the time, it'll have cooled off so much that to me, it'll be considered a great card to have at the price.
Yeah.
But had I bought the card in 2018 when they were just coming out, like I'd have paid it through the nose for it. And I'm okay waiting. Like I'm patient. I don't need to have anything in my collection at any specific time. I don't even own a single Trout card. And I don't know when I will. And who knows if I ever will. I don't know. And it's just like there are times when I feel like I should be buying something when nobody else is buying it. Because it's I look at it as from like I've made bad investment decisions just like the next guy. I've bought at the wrong times in the market. I've bought at really good times, but you brought up the news coverage, and I thought that was a good thing to point out because I'm curious to learn if we didn't have ESPN running that coverage, if we had seen this drastic of a spike in that 91 Upper Deck card. I don't know.
It's hard to tell. I mean, just my own personal experiences is that I've been hanging around Instagram a lot more recently. There's a lot of basketball card collectors, and this Jordan documentary has just been front and center. People have just been going after Jordan. Like just very just aggressively, and there's lots of references to the documentary. There's like lots of like just after watching an episode or two, people are discussing the documentary. Like I can really see, like I feel like I can see it in real time. People watching the documentary, discussing the cards, and then just pushing each other to go after Jordan's basketball, and then as well as the baseball. But you mentioned something that's pretty interesting as well. And when we talk about COVID-19 and how it affects the hobby, like I think obviously there's changes going on in the last couple of months with the wholesale increase in prices. But for me individually, and it sounds like you as well, like I would say like I haven't been impacted at all. Like how I was pursuing cards, the amount of time I was pursuing cards, which cards I was going after, like it hasn't, like I feel like it's been status quo for me. Mm-hmm. Like I am, like I've purchased most of my cards online. Like I've never really, I don't have like a local card shop that I go to. And so like I've just been sort of spending the same amount of time online. And because of that, like I can see lots of increases in prices. But for me as an individual, like I would say like it hasn't impacted me really at all. Obviously you've got to be more careful because there's so many spikes going on. But I mean, that's just common sense anyway. Like you're always on the lookout for that. Or do prices seem high or artificially high? You've got to take note of that and sort of like balance, the desire to obtain a certain card with, increases and fluctuations in price. So like you're just always, I think a wise collector is always, paying attention to what the market is doing so they can make, informed decisions. But because of that, like, I feel like I've got enough experience collecting now. Like I'm able to read the market better than, like most of us, we all have, mistakes that we've made, but we generally get, more savvy to the market as we go. And because of that, like I've sort of tried to stay away from some of these like just really high increases in certain cards that we're seeing. I will say this, however, though, is that I did like in like February, I did January, February, that time frame, I did add a couple of Jordans to my collection, and that it turned out to be really good timing for me because those cards just exploded. So like I'm feeling happy about that, and like I wasn't consciously doing that because like I mean COVID-19 it was starting to make news in like January. But obviously it really wasn't until March that, at least here in the United States, we really felt the significant impact that we're all feeling right now. And like, I guess, because of that, like I knew it, even like in January, like I knew this documentary was coming from ESPN. I think originally it was set to be released like in June during like the NBA playoffs, and right. it got moved up. So some of those things were sort of in the back of my mind, but really the real motivation for me when I added those cards were just that I like the player. I like Michael Jordan as a player. I wasn't looking at it so much from an investment standpoint. Like I said, you always have to balance that. But at the end of the day, I wanted Jordan cards into my collection just to make my collection a little bit more well-rounded than I thought that it was. I wanted representation of MJ, or a little bit more representation. So like I'm feeling happy about that. But if I was really like trying to really pursue this thing from an investment standpoint, I would have just been all over MJ, like only buying MJ like in January and February, and I wasn't doing that. Like that's just not typically how I pursue things, and that's just been my personal experience here. It's kind of interesting to listen to others, and like if you do have time, like you can sort of see people talking on social media at various places about like just these crazy prices and how people are trying to adapt and adjust to it. It's just nice just to be able to sort of observe from the sidelines a little bit. I kind of feel like that's what I'm doing, just sort of watching the hobby and trying to lay low a little bit right now and just sort of seeing what happens.
I like to just watch a lot of stuff in the hobby, like as an observer, just take note, like, oh, that's interesting, that's sold for that much. I for a while there in Radicards, I was doing the top 10 lists. You might remember those, and I loved doing them, by the way. And if you're listening and you liked them, I'm glad you liked them. I stopped doing them, at least for now, because they're extremely time consuming to create. They're awesome, It's fun, but the whole reason for that is because I'm on eBay all the time for selling and buying. Like frequently, we launched our auction house like late last year, and so I'm processing a lot of auctions now, and so I'm on eBay every day. And then there's stuff on eBay that sells that I don't want to own, but I like the card. I'm like, man, what a great card. I don't want to own it, but I just think it's such a cool card to have. And so I wanted to archive them in some way. And so the top 10 lists allowed me to do that. And so it's been cool to kind of watch what's been selling. Now that I don't do the top 10 lists, at least presently, I just throw stuff into like a Pinterest board or a variety of them. I have a bunch of them on Pinterest. And so I'm able to keep stuff that way. It's not as cool as having like, the 10 and then I talk about them, but it's still a nice reference for me to like go back and think, oh man, that superfractor sold. I don't remember the price of it because the link's no longer in working fashion, but that card at one point brought in probably something nice, but look how great it is. And so I look at that. On Instagram is sort of the same way. You've had some success on there, and I follow a lot of the same guys you do because I like to follow the card guys, and I like to see who's buying what. And I'm a big fan of 90s basketball inserts too, and I don't own really any of them, but I don't really have a desire to own any of them because I'm a baseball guy. I just like to see what's out there. It's cool to see people's Anthony Hardaway collections or the various collections that are online. I think it's fun to see them. And so as an observer, I get to see what cards are out there, what chatter is happening around those cards, how much is being paid for certain cards. Because a lot of us, the income is all over the board with who makes what kind of money. So you've got a wide discretion of spending power online, and that makes for really interesting content. And I really like that a lot. And so we're going to kind of move this conversation into this dialogue around investing versus collecting. Because what I've noticed over the last, 5 years more specifically, is that there's a lot of content around what cards I should be buying. Like here's 5 cards you should be buying right now. I'm like, I don't know if you've noticed this, Brian, but and maybe you've thought this yourself, but when I see that, I'm like, who does this guy think he is, and what makes him qualified to tell me what I should be buying? Like, this is like how I think about it. Is like, nobody can gauge what's going to happen tomorrow. So how can we know that these are going to be good investment decisions now? Like a guy could sprain his ankle and he could be out the rest of the season, and his cards won't be sellable tomorrow.
Yeah, definitely. Like, my experience over the last couple of years is that like I've just seen more and more content creation, which is a good thing. I like it that people are excited about cards and talking about cards. Yeah. People have so many different, the hobby itself is so huge. Cards go back, they go back over 100 years. There's so many different sports. There's so many different sets. It's hard for any one person to be able to cover it all. So I think it's good that there's content out there and people are discussing it. But yeah, like it's always wise, whether it's card collecting or anything else, it's always wise to ask yourself, to be critical when people are speaking, and just asking questions like, why is this person, stating, or why is this person, what is their motivation for providing certain information? What is their motivation? And, I think there's a lot of people who, they just love cards and say, hey, this has been my experience, and I think that these cards are going up. And then there's other individuals who, whether you want to call it pumping cards or trying to artificially increase prices, but these influencers, they do exist, and it's I think for new collectors, like it can be easy when you're a new collector and you're like, I need to get information to find a podcast or a YouTube channel. And you start listening to certain individuals and just saying, hey, this person is stating this, and they seem to be an expert, and so I'm going to just follow that. Those recommendations. That is something that I would hope that new collectors, as they come into things, as they come into the hobby, or collectors, investors, whatever you want to call them, all people should just be critical of why certain recommendations are being made. a lot of what I've seen going up are they tend to be if we're talking like base rookie cards, we're talking about like the higher grade stuff, PSA 9 and especially 10. And I think part of that is that the grading companies themselves during COVID-19, they've either been closed or they've been shut down. Things are slowing down with their ability to perform grading.
Mm-hmm.
Because of that, like we talk about, like you've mentioned, like some of these cards, they're not really that rare. And then even some cards have like even like a really high like PSA or BGS population, but there's that perceived rarity at the moment because the grading companies can't grade that the way that they normally can. And so I'm wondering if part of the reason that we're seeing this explosion in prices, especially with graded cards, is just that people are like, I can't get the cards graded now the way I normally would or could. So I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and just pay higher to get a card that's already graded online. They just don't want to wait.
That's a good point, and I'm confident that the grading companies will get back on their feet and they'll have a huge backlog to process, and that'll be good for business. We'll get through this. Like, there's no question. I mean, America's been through much worse in the past, and so I'm fully confident that we'll be able to recover in a quick way once we bounce back. And you brought up a good point that because grading companies are sort of, they're on pause right now, that those of us who would submit, say, an 89 Upper Deck Griffey to PSA, we just, maybe I should go and spend the whatever amount to try to get the 10. And, I hadn't really paid attention because 89 Griffey is I have a couple copies myself. I don't have a 10, but I remember when they were selling for like, I don't know, $400. Now they're $1,300. It's like, that's insanity. I mean, granted, we talk about like supply and demand, and typically when you have a higher supply, you have slightly lower demand. But the Griffey, the Thomas stuff, even the Jordan 91 Upper Deck, it's the supply is so high on those cards that when I see demand not really be impacted, I'm like blown away by it. And the first card I noticed that was the 86 Fleer Jordan, the quote unquote rookie card. Yeah. I say that with quotes because he'd already been in the league like 3 years by the time the 86 the Fleer came out. The only reason why the Fleer gets the rookie designation is because it's the first licensed product from basketball that features his likeness. But really, the 84 Star card is the official rookie card. But that's another conversation entirely. So I look at like the overall supply is not at a deficit. It's at a supreme surplus. There is no shortage of 89 Upper Deck Griffies. You will be able to like find that card every card show, every card shop, every state that has a card. You'll always be able to get your hands on that physically and online somehow, one way or another. Most of us have a copy of that card. The PSA 10s, like PSA 10 890 Leafs Thomases, there's not a shortage of those. In fact, the pop report continues to go up every year. And so we're seeing this spike right now. Like, is the 89 Griffey and a PSA 10 going to remain $1,300 to $1,500? I don't know. I hope not. It seems awfully overpriced to me, but heck, it is one of the most iconic baseball cards of all time. So I get it. But it sounded to be like a pretty reasonable price at $400. $1,500. I'm thinking that's more like 82 tops traded Ripken. That to me is more like in alignment with that price point.
Yeah.
But whatever the case, all of us love that card, and so it's because of its global likeness, if you will, it'll always draw a market. But I'm not sure if that market at $1,500 for the 89 Upper Deck Griffey to 10 is sustainable over time. I mean, I would anticipate that over time it will continue to grow, but to see it go from $400 to $1,500, it's almost a 400% increase in price. That's a big increase.
Yeah.
I just look at that.
Definitely. Like, that's something that it's starting to bother me actually a little bit more. Not just the prices for like PSA 10s, but just the price difference between a 9, like for example, let's just stay with PSA for the moment.
Sure.
Price difference between a 9 and a 10, like. I see that. I mean, I understand that the PSA 10s would be more desirable, but you've got, I think, there's a certain segment of the collecting community that like they don't even consider PSA 9s, or like they just really they're really, everyone says buy the card, not the grade, but in practice that does not happen.
Right.
I
Yeah.
see it not happening more and more and more. Like a lot of those, like sort of coming back to something we were talking about earlier, like some of those investment podcasts or YouTube channels, like a lot of times, like they basically just go right to talk about PSA 10s. The PSA 10 is doing this. The PSA 10 is doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's less. It seems to be less about the. Let's talk about the card. Why is this a great card? Instead of saying, well, this is a PSA 10 version of that card. This is what the PSA 10 is doing. I understand that everyone, people should be able to talk about what they want. I think that's cool. There's nothing wrong about talking about what you want, but
Right.
at the end of the day, I don't know. People, I guess I see some hypocrisy growing where everyone's like, collect the card, not the grade, but it's just not happening. I'm like, just be authentic and say, I do care about PSA 10s, and I don't know, like I've seen a lot of 9s that look better than 10s. Like it just, grading is, I think, at the end of the day, grading is, it's got its issues, but at the end of the day, it's been a positive for the hobby. But it should still be about the cards at the end of the day. And that's just my 2 cents.
Brian's pissed off, guys. Sorry. I'm just kidding. No, look, okay. I've noticed that too. And you bring up something really interesting, is that the investor type content producers are discussing the highest grades of, rare cards or whatever. But it's always like the highest grades. They're never discussing like, but this is also a great card, an 8. And this is how much money you're going to be saving if you get an 8.
Right.
And the difference between an 8 and a 9 is marginal. The difference between a 9 and a 10 is even more marginal most of the time. So it's almost unnoticeable. It's like the 89 Upper Deck Griffey, the hologram on the back impacts the grade. Like how it's printed, how it's centered, like the framing of it, that whole thing. So when I look at certain cards, I'm like, I'd be happy with a 9. You have that card. I don't need a 10. I mean, like the Trout US 175, I'd be happy with a 9. I don't need a 10 of that card. That's fine.
Okay.
Like the 93 SP Jeter, I'd be happy with an 8. I'm good. I don't need a 9 or why bother with a 10? I could spend that money on like a down payment for a house. Like, I look at it as like, really, what is it that I'm after? Is it after the best product quality ever? Or is it after just getting a version, an example into my collection of a card? I mean, take this for example. When was the last time you saw an investor podcast or content producer talking about, you should get a PSA 10 52 tops mantle?
Right. Yeah.
It's like, dude, if you can afford a 1 at $15,000, get a 1.
Right.
Usually it's like, the Reese Hoskins in a 10 or whatever, and I'm like, all right, that's pretty predictable, but yeah, I get it. Whatever, it's cool. Like it's cards. I love cards, so I'm gonna like the content, whatever. But and then you got guys talking about, the 88 Fleer update, John Smoltz in a 10. I was like, yeah, but that card in a 9 is still a really good card. It's
interesting. Like, I mean, look, I like PSA 10s. Like, I've got a lot of PSA 10s in my collection. I have Radicards. I have a lot of raw cards too. Like, I've got it's a big mix of raw, BGS, and PSA. I've got them all because at the end of the day, I'm collecting the card, and if I find the card, that has good eye appeal to me, like the number one inspection that's got to pass is my own eyes.
Sure.
Regardless of what case it's in.
Right.
So that's just it. But I don't want to be a hypocrite either here myself, because I do like the PSA 10s. And I would say that as I've gotten older, like when I first started collecting, I mean, as a kid, obviously, like I was a pure collector, but even as an adult, when I came back, like I always considered myself a pure collector. But what has happened is as my ability to finance more expensive cards has increased over time, which it has, and you're starting to look at more valuable cards, you do start thinking about cards a little bit. Like we're all human. We like to know the value of our cards. and you're conscious of it. Like even if you think you'll never sell this card, like you're conscious of it, and it's fun to watch. Over time though, like, so for me, like I still feel at heart like I'm a so-called, pure collector. Like most of the cards that I bring in, it's the purpose to keep for the long run.
Sure.
And for me, like I've said this before, like for me, the ideal situation for me is I collect the cards all my life and then I pass them down to my kids someday, hopefully a long time from now. But that is sort of the ideal scenario for me and my collection. I like the cards. I like to learn about sports. I like the nostalgia, all about collecting. I just love it. I like to learn about the players. When I first started collecting, that was the reason I collected, is I wanted to learn about the players in the sports. But back to what I was saying, over time though, like as you become more savvy to the market and stuff, like you start paying attention to and seeing and understanding, at least understanding better how cards can be an investment. And I would say like over time, like I'm probably more sort of like in the middle here between pure collector and investor. And the reason for that is that, we all live in the real world, and you never know when you're going to have to, if a bad situation shows up and you need to turn your collection into money. Like if that happens, if something were to happen to one of my family members and I had to do that, like if they got sick or something bad were to happen, something bad were to happen, and I had to do that and I had to raise some funds, I would sell my cards. And so like I'm conscious of being able to do that. Like how liquid are the cards in my collection? Would I be able to get financial value for that? And so I think that's like, I'm not unique there. Like I think there's lots of collectors out there, like, ideally like cards are there to be enjoyed and we have them in our collection, but we have to be realistic and understand that, things happen in life. Life is unpredictable. And as this COVID-19 situation is showing, sometimes like, you've got to make those hard decisions, and it might be necessary to sell a card or most of your collection or some of your collection. And so you've got to pay attention. And I think that's wise collecting, a wise way to be into the hobby. Like you're understanding the market and paying attention to the market. So even if you feel like you're not in certain aspects of the market, if you ever have to jump in, if you ever have to be in that market where like, okay, I need to liquidate my collection, to do something that I need to do personally, that you're able to not be taken. Like you've already done your research ahead of time. And I think that's where I find myself at the moment, like just sort of understanding, okay, this card here, I might really like it, but I don't see it growing in value over the next 10 years. And so like sometimes when I'm making a decision, like I'm going to make a purchase, like I want to add a card to my collection. There's two really awesome cards that I'm looking at. They might be of equal value today. Like probably, in the back of my mind, I'm asking myself, okay, which one of these cards is going to do better, in the long run, just in case I need to liquidate it. I'll be in better position to do so.
Yeah, those are good thoughts, man. Because I've got a friend of mine who's he's pretty well known in the hobby. I'd say really well known, and he. One national, he and I got to talking, and he'd mentioned, he's like, hey Patrick, check this out, I just bought this. He was as a BGS 9 Desert Shield chipper.
Okay.
And I was like, that's great. He's like, yeah, I just started buying stuff that I intend to just use for investment purposes to like make money down the line. It's not part of my collection. It's just to sell later. I was like, that's a really good idea. Like that's a really good thing to exercise in addition to collecting. Like buy stuff just for turning around later in life, because like trading cards are just as much of an investment as stocks, precious metals. Granted, they might be more volatile, but they still are very much investments. It's funny. Some people don't think they are, but they are. The very definition of an investment is something that fluctuates in value, and you can turn a profit on them by buying low and selling high. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be rocks for all I care.
Yeah.
If you can buy it at a certain price point and value tends to increase or decrease at a certain point, you can sell it at a profit later. That's an investment. Trading cards are absolutely that. They're absolutely that. Some better investment decisions than others, obviously. I have cards in my collection I wouldn't be able to sell for the price I bought them for, but those specific items, those specific acquisitions were not made for the specific intention of turning a profit later. They were just because I like the cards and I want them in my collection. Some items, I can't think of an item I've actually purchased with this specific intent of turning a profit later. My Thomas collection stays with me, remains with me. Mm-hmm. And it remains with me to such a degree that it's in my will, like it's that far into what I've been doing. I've been doing this for over 30 years, so like it's staying with me. Yeah. But like when I would launch my auction house some months back, I went through my collection and kind of like, hey, I could put this on my house. I don't need it, but I didn't buy those items because I wanted to make a profit. I just acquired certain things over time from buying collections or whatever that. I just found stuff to put through my auction house and move just because I wanted to get some more exposure. But me, I'm a collector. Like at heart, I just love acquiring, but I'm very specific about what I buy, what I collect. That all the things I buy have to run through a series of prerequisites. Like, does it fit in my collection? If so, how? Where would it fit? Do I collect this set? Do I collect this player? What about the card? Is the card high end enough to like qualify as like an ad? Because I don't just buy commons. I don't open wax, and so like I have all these prerequisites for the singles that I acquire into my collection, and so every single acquisition is like, dang, that's a nice card, And so I like going through my collection and looking at what I've got because it's fun. It's like, but really the hobby should be about fun. If you like buying low and selling high, and that's fun to you, do that. If you like investing, do that. There's no wrong answer here when it comes to collecting, because investing is a form of collecting as well. You're just doing it for a different reason. You're not collecting it to hang on to it. You're collecting it to turn it around later. I totally get that. I think it's fine. You do what makes you happy. And I think that with going back to this COVID conversation is that we have time right now to be able to tinker with those ideas. If you want to invest, if you want to collect, if you want to go for stuff that you hadn't thought of previously or hadn't thought of in a while, cherry pick those items. This is a great time to do that, And in that note, I want to just kind of close it out and say, Brian, what is one way the social distancing has impacted you as a collector?
Let's see here. Well, I had actually, for me, actually just talking about my family, I have a how old is he now? A 7-year-old son who I'm trying to get into collecting. And so we had actually planned to go to a card show in April near where I live. And we've been before, but we don't always make it. We probably make a show maybe once or twice a year. And my son, I was really looking forward to taking him. He had mentioned to me that he was interested in going. He likes sports, but he's also interested in Pokemon and stuff. Sure. And so that might be might be an avenue for him to get into collecting. And so we missed that. And I feel like because of that, it's maybe that was a disappointment. We weren't able to go to that show. There'll be more opportunities later on, but in April, that was definitely something that we were not able to do. And we just have to just get through this, and we'll find a time to go later on.
I wanted to talk about this because we're all impacted by social distancing right now, and we're all kind of tired of it, I think, most of us. And so we're social beings, naturally. And so this is hard time for everybody. I like card shows, and the National's been postponed to December in New Jersey at the National. Like, I can't think of a worse time to have the National. But it's whatever the case is, we just kind of work around it and accept the terms that are allocated to us and make the most of it. So thank you for tuning into the Radicards podcast and Radicards.com. I'm your host, Patrick Reno, and until next time, enjoy collecting. If you like this content, please subscribe. Thank you. Enjoy collecting.